Elvis Presley had already passed the boy. The black Cadillac was half a block down the crowded Memphis street when Elvis suddenly stopped talking. His driver glanced at him through the mirror. "Everything okay, Elvis?" Elvis raised one hand. "Wait." Traffic rolled around them. Horns sounded. People shouted from sidewalks. Store doors opened and closed beneath the hot afternoon sun. But somewhere beneath all that noise, Elvis had heard something. A guitar. Not a good guitar. One string buzzed terribly. Another was slightly out of tune. The rhythm stumbled every few seconds. But underneath those imperfections was something Elvis recognized instantly. Hound Dog. Elvis twisted around in his seat. Through the rear window, he saw him. A young black boy sat on an upside-down wooden crate beside the sidewalk. His clothes were worn. His shoes had seen better days. And the acoustic guitar across his knees looked as if it had survived years of punishment. But the boy wasn't playing like someone begging strangers for coins. He was playing like the sidewalk belonged to him. Like every pedestrian was an audience. Like that broken guitar was the finest instrument in Memphis. Elvis stared. Then suddenly, "Back up." The driver looked at him. "What?" "Back the Cadillac up." "Here." Elvis pointed behind them. "Right here." The Cadillac stopped. Then slowly began reversing down the street. People noticed immediately. Heads turned. Pedestrians moved aside. The boy kept playing. He had absolutely no idea that one of the most famous men in America was reversing a Cadillac through Memphis traffic because of him. The car stopped beside the wooden crate. The window lowered. The boy played another chord. B-U-Z-Z-Z-Z. Then he looked up. His fingers froze. His mouth opened. Elvis Presley was staring at him. For several seconds, neither spoke. Finally, Elvis smiled. "Don't stop because of me." The boy looked at the guitar. Then back at Elvis. "You're Elvis Presley." Elvis nodded toward the instrument. "And you're murdering one of my songs." Several people nearby gasped. The boy's face dropped. Then Elvis grinned. The boy realized he was joking. A nervous laugh escaped him. "So keep going." By now, people were gathering. The boy swallowed. Then started again. The first chord buzzed horribly. Someone in the crowd laughed. The boy's face tightened. His hands almost stopped. Elvis immediately turned toward the laughter. One look. Silence. Then Elvis looked back at the boy. "Keep playing." So he did. And this time, Elvis listened carefully. The guitar was terrible. But the hands weren't. The boy changed his rhythm whenever one string failed. He struck the wooden body to create percussion. He bent notes because the instrument couldn't hold its tuning. He wasn't simply surviving the guitar's problems. He had learned to make those problems part of the music. Elvis's smile slowly disappeared. Now he was studying him. When the song ended, Elvis opened the Cadillac door. The sidewalk erupted. Elvis stepped out and walked directly toward the boy. "What's your name?" "Samuel." "How old are you?" 14. Elvis pointed toward the guitar. "How long have you been playing?" "Couple years." "Who taught you?" Samuel shrugged. "Nobody." Elvis frowned. "Nobody." Samuel shook his head. "I listen to records when I can." Elvis crouched beside him. "Where'd you get the guitar?" Samuel looked down. "My father." Elvis smiled. "He play?" Samuel's expression changed. "He did." Elvis caught the word immediately. "Did, not does." His voice became quieter. "Where's your father?" Samuel ran his fingers across a long crack in the guitar. Then whispered, "He died." The street suddenly seemed quieter. Samuel explained that his father had loaded trucks. He would return home exhausted, but whenever Samuel asked him to play, somehow he always found enough strength to pick up the guitar. Before he died, he taught Samuel only 3 chords. "So I figured out the rest," Samuel said. Elvis stared at him differently now. Then he noticed an old cup near Samuel's feet. A few coins sat inside. "Why are you playing out here?" Samuel hesitated. "Money." Elvis looked toward the cup. "What are you saving for?" Samuel touched the broken guitar. Elvis assumed he understood. "A new one." Samuel shook his head. "The new one's not for me." Elvis became still. Samuel pointed farther down the street. "My mother works almost every day." He hesitated. "My little sister needs glasses." Elvis stared. "I thought if I made enough playing." Samuel didn't finish. "He didn't need to." "You're buying your sister's glasses." Samuel nodded. Elvis looked at the destroyed guitar. "And what about this?" Samuel smiled faintly. "This one still works if you know where not to touch it." That sentence hit Elvis harder than Samuel realized. The boy wasn't sitting there dreaming about fame. He wasn't trying to become Elvis Presley. He wasn't even playing for himself. He was using the one thing his father had left behind: to help his family. And before we continue, tell me, where are you watching from? Write your city or country in the comments. If you believe talent can appear where people least expect it, like this video, comment below, share it with someone who loves Elvis, and subscribe, because Elvis was about to do something Samuel never could have imagined when that Cadillac reversed toward him. Elvis suddenly sat on the edge of the crate. Samuel nearly jumped. "What are you doing?" Elvis pointed toward the guitar. "Give me that." Samuel hesitated, then carefully handed over the instrument. Elvis struck one chord. B-U-Z-Z-Z-Z. His face twisted. Samuel laughed. "Told you." Elvis tried another. "Worse." The crowd laughed. Elvis stared at Samuel. "How in the world were you making this thing sound decent?" Samuel pointed toward one string. "You gotta be gentle with that one." Elvis raised an eyebrow. "Now you're teaching me." Samuel panicked. "No, sir." Elvis grinned. "You absolutely are." He handed it back. "Show me." Samuel repositioned his fingers. He played the chord. Clean enough. Elvis leaned closer. "Again." Samuel repeated it. Elvis watched his hands. Then something extraordinary happened. Samuel began playing Hound Dog again. And Elvis Presley started singing. People stopped walking. Shopkeepers stepped outside. Cars slowed. There was no stage. No spotlight. No orchestra. Just Elvis Presley sitting beside a 14-year-old boy on a Memphis sidewalk, while Samuel accompanied him on his father's broken guitar. Samuel looked terrified. Elvis nodded. "Keep playing." Samuel did. His confidence grew. The crowd grew with it. And when they finished, people cheered. Samuel looked around in disbelief. For perhaps the first time, strangers weren't looking at him as a poor boy sitting beside a cup of coins. They were looking at him as a musician. Samuel stood. "Thank you, Mr. Presley." Elvis frowned. "For what?" "For singing with me." Elvis looked at the coins, then toward the boy. "How much are the glasses?" Samuel told him. Elvis immediately reached for his wallet. But Samuel stepped backward. "No." Elvis froze. "What?" Samuel swallowed. "I don't want charity." The entire sidewalk went silent. Someone whispered, "Kid, are you crazy?" Elvis stared at Samuel. A multimillionaire stood before a boy who desperately needed money. One gesture could solve the problem. But Samuel was refusing. Not because he was ungrateful. Because somewhere between poverty, grief, and responsibility, he was desperately protecting the little dignity life had left him. Slowly, Elvis put his wallet away. "All right." Samuel looked surprised. Elvis nodded. "No charity." Then he pointed toward the broken guitar. A smile appeared. "Then let's make a deal." Samuel frowned. "What kind?" Elvis looked at the growing crowd. "You played for me." Then toward half the street watching them. And apparently for half of Memphis. People laughed. Elvis turned back. "So I'm hiring you." Samuel blinked. "For what?" Elvis walked toward the Cadillac and sat on the hood. He crossed his arms, then smiled. "A private concert." Samuel stared at him. "When?" Elvis leaned back against the Cadillac. "Right now." "One song." Samuel's grip tightened around his father's guitar. Then Elvis delivered the part Samuel would never forget. "You set the price." Samuel shook his head. "I don't know." Elvis looked toward the pawn shop, then back at Samuel. "How much do those glasses cost?" Samuel's eyes widened. The crowd erupted. Elvis smiled. "Funny coincidence." Samuel's eyes filled with tears. But Elvis wasn't giving him charity anymore. He was paying a musician for honest work. Samuel slowly raised his father's broken guitar. His fingers found the strings. Elvis expected Hound Dog. But Samuel didn't play it. Instead, he began playing a melody Elvis had never heard before. Simple, beautiful, painfully sad. The smile vanished from Elvis's face. He leaned forward. And within seconds, he realized this wasn't just another song. When Samuel finished, Elvis stared at him. "Who wrote that?" Samuel looked down at his father's guitar. Then whispered, "My dad." And in that moment, Elvis Presley realized the broken instrument in Samuel's hands was worth far more than anything money could replace. The final note disappeared beneath the noise of the Memphis street. Samuel kept his eyes on the battered guitar. Elvis Presley said nothing. A moment earlier, the sidewalk had been filled with laughter, cheers, and excited whispers. Now everyone was silent. Because the melody Samuel had just played sounded nothing like Hound Dog. There was no showmanship in it. No famous chorus. No reason for the crowd to recognize it. But Elvis had heard something underneath those simple chords. Something personal. Something unfinished. "Your father wrote that." Samuel nodded. Elvis looked again at the cracked wood. Then at the boy. "Then don't ever sell that instrument." Samuel immediately shook his head. "I wasn't going to." "Good." Elvis stood from the hood of the Cadillac and walked toward him. He carefully touched the edge of the guitar. The wood was worn where Samuel's father's arm had rested. There were scratches around the sound hole. The neck had been polished smooth by years of hands moving across it. A new guitar would sound better. It would stay in tune. It wouldn't buzz every time Samuel touched the wrong place. But a new guitar would never have those marks. Elvis understood that. Some things aren't valuable because they're perfect, he said quietly. Samuel looked up. Elvis tapped the guitar gently. They're valuable because somebody you loved touched them first. Samuel tightened his grip around the instrument. Then Elvis paid him for the private performance. Enough for his sister's glasses. Samuel stared at the money. For several seconds, he didn't move. You earned it, Elvis said. Samuel looked at him. But that's too much for one song. Elvis smiled. That's for me to decide. You're the musician. Samuel slowly accepted it. Not as charity. As payment. That distinction mattered. Elvis could see it in the way Samuel stood straighter. The crowd saw it too. A few minutes earlier, people had looked at the boy and seen poverty. Now Elvis had forced them to see something else. Value. Samuel looked toward the pawnshop. His eyes filled. My sister can get her glasses. Elvis nodded. Looks that way. Samuel wiped his face quickly. Thank you. Elvis pointed toward the guitar. Thank that thing. Samuel laughed. But Elvis wasn't finished. He glanced toward the boy's worn clothes. Then toward the few coins still sitting inside the cup. Where does your mother work? Samuel's expression immediately became suspicious. Why? Elvis smiled. I'd like to meet the woman raising a kid stubborn enough to turn down Elvis Presley's money. The crowd erupted in laughter. Samuel tried not to smile. He failed. Later that afternoon, Elvis stood inside a modest workplace talking to Samuel's mother. The moment she understood what her son had done, embarrassment covered her face. He refused your money. Elvis nodded. Oh Lord. She looked at Samuel. I am so sorry, Mr. Presley. Elvis immediately raised his hand. Don't apologize. She stopped. Elvis glanced toward Samuel. Don't ever apologize for raising a boy with pride. Samuel looked down. His mother stared at Elvis. He shouldn't have been rude. He wasn't. Elvis's voice became serious. He wanted to earn what he brought home. Then Elvis looked at Samuel. And he did. The mother's eyes moved toward the money. For his sister. Samuel nodded. Her expression collapsed. She pulled her son toward her and held him. Samuel resisted for about half a second. Then hugged her back. Elvis turned slightly away. He understood that moment didn't belong to him. But when Samuel's mother finally released her son, Elvis said something that changed the conversation. Your boy has talent. Samuel looked up immediately. His mother blinked. Samuel. Elvis smiled. Samuel. The boy stared. Elvis continued. But talent isn't the rare part. Samuel frowned. What is? Elvis pointed toward the broken guitar. You kept playing when that instrument gave you every excuse to quit. Samuel looked at the guitar. Elvis stepped closer. Remember that. Because someday it won't be a broken string. Samuel listened. It'll be somebody telling you you're not good enough. Somebody laughing. A door closing. Somebody deciding what you can become before they've heard you play. Elvis tapped Samuel's chest lightly. When that happens, you do exactly what you did today. Samuel swallowed. What? Find another way to make the song work. The words stayed with him. But Elvis didn't want inspiration to become another empty promise. Samuel needed opportunity. So Elvis began arranging something more valuable than a handful of money. A local music teacher. Lessons. Transportation. A chance to learn properly. Samuel's mother looked overwhelmed. We can't afford. Elvis shook his head. Already handled. Samuel immediately stiffened. Elvis noticed. Relax. The boy looked suspicious. This isn't charity. Elvis smiled. Consider it an investment. In what? Elvis pointed toward him. Finding out whether I was right about you. Samuel smiled. That answer he could accept. And before long, another surprise arrived. A guitar case. Samuel opened it carefully. Inside was a beautiful new instrument. Clean wood. Perfect strings. Polished hardware. Samuel stared. He reached toward it. Then stopped. His eyes moved immediately toward his father's battered guitar leaning nearby. What happens to Dad's? Elvis didn't hesitate. Nothing. Samuel looked at him. Elvis pointed toward the old instrument. That stays with you. Why? Elvis looked from the new guitar to the broken one. Then he gave Samuel an answer the boy would remember for years. The new guitar will teach you where you're going. Elvis gently touched the worn body of his father's instrument. That one reminds you where you came from. Samuel said nothing. He simply placed the new guitar beside the old one. For the first time, they stood together. One represented memory, the other possibility, and Samuel belonged somewhere between them. Months passed. Samuel practiced constantly. His fingertips hardened. His chords became cleaner. His timing sharpened. The boy who had once learned to avoid broken strings began learning why chords worked, how rhythm moved, how musicians listened to one another. But whenever frustration came, he returned to his father's guitar. The buzz was still there. The crack was still there. And somehow that old instrument reminded him. You learned when this was all you had. So keep going. Then one evening, Samuel received an invitation. Elvis wanted him at a rehearsal. Samuel arrived carrying the new guitar. The moment he entered, he saw Elvis across the room. Elvis looked at the case. Where's the old one? At home. Elvis nodded. Good. Samuel smiled nervously. Why? Elvis looked toward the professional musicians waiting across the room. Then back at Samuel. Because tonight isn't about remembering. Samuel's smile disappeared. Elvis pointed toward the musicians. Tonight is about finding out what's next. Samuel looked across the room. His stomach dropped. These weren't kids from the neighborhood. These were professional musicians. Men who could hear a wrong chord before Samuel even realized he'd played it. One adjusted his guitar. Another sat behind the drums. A third looked toward Samuel and waited. Samuel's breathing changed. I can't. Elvis frowned. What? I can't do this. Why? Samuel lowered his voice. They're professionals. Elvis shrugged. So? Samuel stared at him. They'll laugh at me. The words came out quietly, but Elvis heard the fear beneath them. This wasn't the same boy who had played fearlessly on the sidewalk. Out there, Samuel had nothing to lose. Here, for the first time, he had begun believing he might actually become something. And suddenly, failure mattered. Elvis walked toward him. "You know what I heard when I passed you that day?" Samuel shook his head. Elvis answered, "A broken guitar." Samuel's face fell. Then Elvis continued, "I almost kept driving." Samuel looked up. "But I listened again." Elvis placed one hand on his shoulder. "And I heard somebody refusing to sound broken just because his guitar was." Samuel's eyes locked onto Elvis. Elvis pointed toward the rehearsal room. "That's the musician I brought here." Samuel looked toward the professionals. His hands were already trembling. Elvis stepped aside. "Now go show them." Samuel swallowed, then walked into the room. Nobody applauded. Nobody encouraged him. The musicians simply waited. Samuel lifted the new guitar. For the first time in his life, there was nothing wrong with the instrument. No broken string to blame. No terrible tuning. No cracked wood. If the music failed now, the mistake would belong to him. Samuel positioned his fingers. The drummer raised his sticks. Elvis stood silently near the wall. Samuel looked toward him one last time. Elvis didn't nod. He didn't rescue him. He simply waited. Samuel turned back, then played the first chord. Perfectly clean. The band entered. For several seconds, everything worked. Then the progression changed. Samuel missed it. His eyes widened. He tried to recover. Another mistake. The drummer continued. Samuel lost the rhythm completely. His face burned. One of the musicians looked toward him. Samuel stopped playing. The room became painfully quiet. His worst fear had happened. He had failed in front of professionals. Samuel looked toward Elvis, expecting him to step forward. But Elvis didn't move. And what Elvis did next would teach Samuel something far more important than any guitar lesson he had received. The rehearsal room was silent. Samuel stood in the middle of it, with the beautiful new guitar hanging from his shoulder. His hands had stopped moving. The drummer lowered his sticks. One musician glanced toward another. Samuel could feel the heat rising into his face. He had imagined this moment for months. He had imagined walking into a room filled with professionals and finally proving that Elvis Presley had been right about him. Instead, he had lost the rhythm. Completely. Samuel looked toward Elvis. Surely Elvis would say something. Stop the band. Explain that Samuel was young. Tell everyone it was his first time. Give him another chance. But Elvis Presley remained against the wall. Silent. Samuel's embarrassment turned into confusion. Then anger. Elvis. Elvis looked at him. Samuel waited. Nothing. Finally. Aren't you going to help me? Elvis crossed his arms. No. Samuel stared at him. One of the musicians shifted uncomfortably. Samuel's voice dropped. But I messed it up. I noticed. The words hurt. Samuel looked toward the floor. Maybe he'd misunderstood everything. Maybe the sidewalk had been luck. Maybe Elvis had heard talent that wasn't really there. Maybe Samuel was still just a kid who knew how to make a broken guitar sound slightly less broken. His fingers tightened around the neck of the new instrument. I told you I couldn't do this. Elvis finally moved. He walked toward Samuel. No. Samuel looked up. You told me you were afraid they'd laugh at you. Elvis stopped directly in front of him. That's not the same thing. Samuel said nothing. Elvis pointed toward the musicians. Did anybody laugh? Samuel glanced around. Nobody had. No. Did anybody tell you to leave? No. Did anybody say you weren't good enough? Samuel shook his head. Elvis leaned closer. Then who said it? Samuel froze. The answer was obvious. He had. Elvis stepped backward. You made a mistake and decided what everybody in this room thought before they got a chance to think it. Samuel stared at him. Elvis pointed toward the guitar. That's a dangerous habit. Samuel swallowed. What am I supposed to do? Elvis's answer was immediate. Find your way back. Samuel frowned. To where? The song. Elvis turned toward the drummer. Start again. Samuel's eyes widened. Wait. The sticks clicked. The musicians entered. Samuel panicked. Elvis. But Elvis was already walking back toward the wall. Samuel had no choice. He grabbed the first chord. Then the second. The rhythm moved. This time he concentrated less on himself and more on the musicians around him. He listened. For several measures, everything worked. Then Samuel missed another change. His stomach dropped. But this time he didn't stop. He remembered the sidewalk. A broken string. A terrible buzz. His father's battered guitar refusing to cooperate. Back then, Samuel had learned to adjust. So he listened for the drummer, found the beat, changed his hand position, and slipped back into the progression. One of the musicians looked toward him. Samuel expected disappointment. Instead, the man smiled. Samuel almost missed the next chord because of it. The song continued. Another mistake came. Samuel recovered faster. Then another. He recovered again. Elvis watched from the wall without saying a word. Because this was exactly what he wanted Samuel to discover. A musician wasn't somebody who never lost the rhythm. A musician knew how to return to it. When the song ended, Samuel was breathing hard. Nobody spoke. Then the drummer tapped one stick against another. Again. Samuel looked toward Elvis. Elvis raised an eyebrow. This time Samuel didn't ask for permission. He turned toward the drummer. Again. Elvis smiled. They played it again. Then another song. Then another. Samuel made mistakes. But something inside him had changed. Every mistake stopped feeling like a verdict. It became information. Too early. Listen. Wrong chord. Adjust. Lost the rhythm. Find it. By the end of the rehearsal, Samuel's shirt was damp with sweat and his fingertips hurt. But when the final chord faded, one of the guitarists walked toward him. Samuel stiffened. The man pointed toward his hands. You've got good instincts. Samuel looked surprised. Really? You listen. Samuel almost laughed. Those were the same words he'd told Elvis on the sidewalk when asked who had taught him. I listen. The guitarist continued. You're rough. Samuel's smile weakened. Very rough. Elvis laughed from across the room. Samuel glared at him. The guitarist smiled. But rough can be taught. He tapped Samuel's chest. Listening is harder. Samuel looked toward Elvis. Elvis gave him a tiny nod. That was enough. When the musicians began packing their instruments, Samuel approached Elvis. "You knew I'd mess up." Elvis smiled. "I was counting on it." Samuel looked offended. "Why?" "Because you've been practicing alone." "So?" Elvis pointed toward the empty chairs. "Playing alone teaches you how to control yourself." Then toward the musicians. "Playing with other people teaches you how to listen when you don't control everything." Samuel thought about it, then asked, "Why didn't you help me?" Elvis became serious. "Because if I'd stopped the room every time you made a mistake, what would you learn?" Samuel didn't answer. "That Elvis Presley will rescue me." Elvis nodded. "And I won't always be there." The words landed differently. Samuel lowered his eyes. Elvis continued, "I can introduce you to teachers. I can put a good guitar in your hands. I can open a door." Then he pointed toward Samuel. "But I can't walk through it for you." Samuel stared at him. That was the real gift Elvis had been trying to give him. Not a life without difficult roads, but a genuine chance to learn how to walk them himself. Samuel nodded slowly. Then Elvis smiled. "Besides." "What?" "You were better the second time." Samuel laughed. "That's all I get." "What do you want, a trophy?" Samuel laughed harder. For the first time that evening, the fear was gone. Before Samuel left, Elvis noticed him looking at the new guitar. "Something wrong?" Samuel shook his head. "I like it." "But..." Samuel hesitated. "It doesn't sound like Dad's." Elvis understood immediately. "It's not supposed to." Samuel looked at him. Elvis sat beside him. "You remember what I told you?" Samuel nodded. "The new guitar shows me where I'm going. And the old one reminds me where I came from." Elvis smiled. "Exactly." Samuel ran one hand across the polished wood. "Sometimes I feel guilty playing this one." "Why?" "Dad never had anything like it." Elvis's expression softened. "Samuel." The boy looked up. "Your father gave you 3 chords." Samuel nodded. "You figured out the rest." Another nod. Elvis pointed toward the new guitar. "Maybe this isn't leaving him behind." Samuel waited. Maybe this is what those 3 chords were trying to become. Samuel stared at him. The room suddenly felt quieter. His father had never been able to give him expensive lessons, never been able to buy him a beautiful instrument. But he had given Samuel a beginning. 3 chords, an old guitar, a reason to listen. Maybe moving forward wasn't betrayal. Maybe it was continuation. Samuel closed the case. "Thanks." Elvis smiled. "Don't thank me yet." Samuel frowned. "Why?" Elvis stood. "Because you're coming back next week." Samuel's eyes widened. "To rehearse?" "Yes." "With them?" "Yes." Samuel looked toward the professional musicians, then back at Elvis. This time he didn't say he couldn't. He smiled. "Okay." Elvis noticed. No fear. No excuse. Just okay. The weeks that followed changed Samuel. He continued his lessons. He continued rehearsing. And every time he entered a room where somebody was better than him, instead of feeling ashamed, he watched. He listened. He learned. Months earlier, a stranger had laughed when Samuel's broken guitar buzzed on the sidewalk. Elvis had silenced that laughter and told him to keep playing. Now Samuel no longer needed Elvis to silence anyone. He had learned something stronger. Keep playing anyway. But one evening, after rehearsal, Elvis asked Samuel a question. "What do you want?" Samuel frowned. "What do you mean?" "With music." Samuel looked toward his guitar. "I don't know." "You want to be famous." Samuel shook his head. Elvis smiled. "Good answer. You don't like being famous." Elvis laughed. "That's a longer conversation." Samuel smiled. Elvis became serious again. "What do you want music to do for you?" Samuel thought, then answered, "I want my mother to stop worrying." Elvis looked at him. "And after that?" Samuel hesitated. "I want my sister to have what she needs." "And after that?" Samuel became quiet. Nobody had ever pushed the question that far. For most of his life, Samuel's dreams had ended where survival began. Food, bills, glasses, helping his mother. He had never been given the luxury of imagining what he wanted. Finally, he whispered, "I want to play something that makes somebody stop walking." Elvis froze. Samuel continued, "Like you did." Elvis stared at him. "I want somebody to hear me." Samuel touched his guitar. "And turn around." For several seconds, Elvis couldn't answer. Because Samuel had finally understood what happened that afternoon. The Cadillac hadn't changed his life simply because Elvis Presley was inside it. It changed because somebody powerful enough to keep going noticed. Elvis smiled. "Then you've got work to do." Samuel nodded. "I know." But before he could leave, Elvis stopped him. "One more thing." Samuel turned. Elvis's expression had become unusually serious. "Tomorrow, bring your father's guitar." Samuel frowned. "I thought you said rehearsals were about what's next." "They are." "Then why bring the old one?" Elvis looked toward the stage at the far end of the room. Because Elvis had arranged something Samuel knew nothing about. Something that would force the boy to bring his past and his future into the same room. Elvis smiled. "Because tomorrow." He paused. "You're not rehearsing for us." Samuel's heart began pounding. "Who am I playing for?" Elvis looked directly into his eyes. And the answer would take Samuel all the way back to the sidewalk where everything began. An audience. Samuel barely slept. Elvis Presley's words followed him home. "Tomorrow, you're not rehearsing for us." Who am I playing for? An audience. Samuel had played for strangers before. He had played on sidewalks while people walked past carrying groceries. He had played outside shops while cars disappeared through Memphis traffic. He had played for coins because his little sister needed glasses. But that was different. Nobody had expected anything from him then. Tomorrow, people would be sitting there specifically to listen. That frightened him more than poverty ever had. Before sunrise, Samuel sat on the edge of his bed. Two guitar cases rested on the floor. One contained the beautiful instrument Elvis had given him. The other barely deserved to be called a case anymore. Samuel opened it. Inside was his father's guitar. Cracked, scratched, worn. One string still temperamental. Samuel lifted it carefully. He placed his fingers on the first 3 chords his father had taught him. The sound buzzed. Samuel smiled. "Still fighting me." He played again. Better. Then he remembered his father's voice. As long as we can still sing, we're not completely beaten. Samuel closed his eyes. For a moment, he wasn't preparing for an audience. He was sitting beside his father again. That afternoon, Samuel arrived carrying both guitars. Elvis was waiting backstage. When he saw the old case, he smiled. "You brought it. You told me to." Elvis pointed toward the second case. "And the new one." "Both. Good." Samuel looked toward the curtain. He could hear people talking beyond it. "How many?" Elvis shrugged. "Enough." Samuel's stomach tightened. "Who are they?" "People." "That doesn't help." Elvis laughed. Samuel didn't. "What if I mess up?" Elvis stopped smiling. "You will." Samuel stared at him. "That's supposed to make me feel better." "No." Elvis stepped closer. "It's supposed to make you stop wasting energy hopping. You won't." Samuel became quiet. Elvis continued. "You're going to miss chords. You may lose the rhythm. Your hands might shake." Then Elvis pointed toward Samuel's chest. "None of that decides whether you belong on that stage." "What does?" Elvis looked toward the curtain. "What you do after the mistake." Samuel remembered the rehearsal. "Find your way back." He nodded. Then Elvis asked, "Which guitar are you starting with?" Samuel looked at both cases. "The new one." Elvis shook his head. Samuel frowned. "You want Dad's." "I don't want anything." Elvis stepped aside. "Choose for yourself." Samuel stared at the cases. One guitar represented the musician he was becoming. The other represented the boy who had started with 3 chords. Finally, Samuel reached for the battered case. The curtain opened. Samuel walked onto the stage. His father's broken guitar was in his hands. The audience looked larger than he expected. Not thousands, but enough faces to make his throat close. Samuel stopped. Somebody whispered. Another person pointed toward the damaged guitar. Samuel suddenly remembered the sidewalk. The laughter after that terrible buzzing chord. His fingers began trembling. Then he saw Elvis standing in the darkness beside the stage. Elvis didn't wave, didn't smile, didn't rescue him. Samuel understood. This was his moment. He sat, adjusted the guitar, and played. "Bay-u-zee-zee-zee-zee." A few people laughed. Samuel froze. There it was again. The sound that had embarrassed him on the sidewalk. Months ago, Elvis had needed to silence the laughter and tell Samuel to keep playing. This time, Elvis said nothing. Samuel looked toward the audience, then down at the guitar. He whispered, "Okay, Dad," and played again. The chord came cleaner. Then another. The room settled. Samuel began the melody his father had written. The same melody he had played for Elvis beside the Cadillac. Simple, sad, beautiful. People stopped whispering. Samuel's hands steadied. The broken guitar began doing what it had always done. Not producing perfect sound, producing his sound. Halfway through, one string slipped out of tune. Samuel heard it immediately. Months earlier, panic might have stopped him. Instead, he changed the chord shape, adjusted the melody, found another way. Elvis smiled in the darkness. Samuel continued. By the final passage, nobody was laughing. Nobody was talking. Everyone was listening. The last note rang. Samuel lowered his hand. Silence. For one terrifying second, he thought he had failed. Then one person stood. Another followed. Then another. Within moments, the entire room was on its feet. Samuel stared. Applause rolled toward him. But he wasn't looking at the audience. He was looking toward Elvis. Elvis remained beside the curtain. Samuel smiled. Months earlier, Samuel had told him what he wanted from music. He didn't ask for fame. He didn't ask for money. He had said, I want to play something that makes somebody stop walking. Tonight, they had stopped, and they had listened. Elvis joined him on stage. The applause grew louder. Samuel immediately stood. Elvis pointed toward the chair. Sit down, you're making me nervous. People laughed. Samuel sat. Elvis looked at the old guitar. Tell them about it. Samuel's smile vanished. What? Tell them. Samuel looked toward the audience. Then at the guitar. My father gave me this. The room quieted. He worked loading trucks. Samuel swallowed. He'd come home tired. But when I asked him to play, a small smile appeared. He usually did. Samuel ran his thumb over the scratched wood. He taught me 3 chords before he died. A woman near the front lowered her head. Samuel continued. I thought 3 chords weren't much. He looked toward Elvis. But they were enough to start. Elvis nodded. Samuel pointed toward the crack. People told me I needed another guitar. Then he smiled. They were right. The audience laughed. Samuel looked toward the second case, waiting near the stage. I have a better one now. But this one. His voice weakened. This one knows my father. The room became completely still. Elvis looked down. Because Samuel finally understood what Elvis had tried to teach him, the new guitar could show him where he was going without erasing the instrument that reminded him where he came from. Samuel continued. I used to think the broken parts made it worthless. He touched the damaged wood. Now I think they prove somebody kept using it. Elvis looked toward him. Samuel smiled. Maybe people are like that too. That line hit Elvis unexpectedly. The audience applauded. Samuel waited. Then Elvis sat beside him. You know something. What? The first time I heard you, I almost kept driving. Samuel smiled. I know. Elvis shook his head. No, think about that. Samuel's smile faded. If I'd heard only the bad string. Elvis paused. I'd have missed you. The audience became quiet. Elvis looked toward them. How many people do we walk past because something about them looks broken? Samuel stared at him. How many people never get heard because we decide what they're worth before they get a chance to show us? Elvis pointed toward Samuel. That boy didn't need me to give him talent. Then toward the old guitar. It was already there. Samuel lowered his head. Elvis continued. He needed somebody to stop long enough to hear it. Applause exploded. But Samuel knew the deeper truth. Elvis hadn't simply stopped. He had respected him. When Samuel refused charity, Elvis didn't humiliate him. He turned help into payment for music Samuel had actually performed. Then came lessons. A new guitar. Rehearsals. Mistakes. Second chances. Elvis had opened doors. But Samuel had walked through them. Years would change many things. Samuel would grow taller. His hands would become stronger. His playing would become cleaner. His sister would wear the glasses he'd once played on a Memphis sidewalk to afford. And the beautiful guitar Elvis gave him would eventually collect scratches of its own. But one instrument would never leave him: his father's guitar. Because that battered piece of wood contained two beginnings. The first came when his father placed Samuel's fingers on 3 chords. The second came on a hot Memphis afternoon, when a black Cadillac had already driven past. Inside it, Elvis Presley heard something beneath the traffic. A familiar song, played badly, on a broken guitar, by a boy most people barely noticed. Elvis could have kept going. He had somewhere else to be. There were always people waiting for Elvis Presley. Always another appointment, another room, another crowd. But he listened twice. And then he said, "Back up the car." Those 4 words didn't magically create Samuel's future. They did something more important. They gave his future a chance to be heard. Because sometimes changing a life doesn't begin with a grand speech. Sometimes it begins when everybody else keeps walking, and one person stops. Sometimes it begins when someone sees a cracked guitar and asks what music is still inside it. Sometimes it begins when someone looks beyond poverty, clothes, race, age, or circumstance, and sees possibility. And sometimes the person who changes your life doesn't arrive because you called for help. Sometimes they've already passed you. They simply hear something worth coming back for. That afternoon in Memphis, Samuel thought he was playing Hound Dog for spare change. He had no idea Elvis Presley was listening from a Cadillac. No idea the car would stop. No idea it would reverse. No idea that the broken guitar his father left behind was about to open a door Samuel had never believed existed. And Elvis learned something too. Never judge a song by the instrument playing it. Because sometimes the most extraordinary music comes from the thing everyone else thought was broken. And sometimes all a person needs is for somebody to turn around.